the cloud. And so I'm going to turn it over to Michael Stoehr and Brenda Simmons, who are experts, to start this webinar.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's session. And today's topic is in looking at employment preparation and work-based learning experiences in the virtual world that we are currently working in because of COVID-19. So presenting today, and Brenda, let me just go to the next slide if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. This is Brenda Simmons, and I work with the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center, or WINTAC, and I am part of the Pre-Employment Transition Services team.
Great, and my name is Michael Stoehr, and I work for NTACT, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the presentation. So just a quick comment on what the purpose of today's webinar is. We are looking at sharing strategies and ideas that are specific to looking at working with students in this virtual world, and in particular, looking at work-based learning experiences and work-based learning strategies. This webinar is not set up to provide any type of federal, state, or legal guidance regarding programs and services for either schools through IDEA or VR systems, looking at the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act or any other agency legislation. We do have a number of links on this slide of more recent webinars and fact sheets regarding those legal considerations in the world that we're currently living in to help make sure that we are serving students with disabilities. We are continuing to live in very challenging times. There's a resource, and the link is there, that Education Week had put out that was updated a couple days ago. And currently 12 states have suspended schools or closed schools for the rest of the school year. There are 3 states and a U.S. territory that are closed until further notice. And this is really affecting millions of students across the United States. Likewise, our VR offices, a number of them in our states are closed, their programs are closed. Many others are working remotely, and many of the VR offices are working in collaboration with their state's Department of Labor and looking at those individuals that have filed for unemployment. The last bullet on this slide is talking about that fact. That over 7 million individuals have filed for unemployment. And there is a link on there from the Department of Labor to talk about that. So it really is a different environment that we are currently working in and in supporting our students with disabilities. However, with these challenging times, we are still moving forward, as you all are on today's call. And if schools are open and operating in some fashion, whether that's through providing information packets or looking at providing education virtually, schools are still required to follow requirements of FAPE and FERPA. Likewise, state vocational rehab offices are looking at those requirements that they have, ensuring that they are still following the legislation of WIOA and providing pre-ED services. And the purpose of today's webinar really is to look at that particular area of pre-EDs where we're talking about work-based learning experiences and how we can still provide work-based learning experiences for students with disabilities as part of their planning, either part of their planning with the VR agency's supports or part of that planning with the special education departments and their IEPs. So what we'd like to do now is to take a poll, and hopefully it works this time, and would like to just get an idea, a sense of how folks are working across the country. So whether you're in the VR agency or you are in an education system, how are you providing services, or are you providing services? Are you working remotely? Are you not providing any services? maybe in some parts of your state, services are being provided, but not in others. Or are you a state that are making plans, or maybe you're just not sure what your state's doing? So let's just give a minute to see. Thanks for voting, folks. And looks like about half folks have, so keep on voting. We'll give you another minute or two. And I'm glad the poll was working again.
And Michael, do you want us to go back? I think I could relaunch the other poll, or should we just proceed?
It might be helpful to see who's on. So why don't we give this just another couple seconds, and let's see how folks are working. And sure, let's see who's on the call. I think that would be great.
About 60% of you have voted. Continue.
And while we are doing this, if folks are having trouble viewing the entire PowerPoint slide, if you go to view options at the top of your screen, there's an option to fit to screen, I believe it says, sorry, fit to window, and that will allow you to see the whole slide.
About 60% have, it's slowing down. Should
Yeah,
I just, okay.
I think we're good.
Okay.
So it looks like the majority of the folks on the call, your school or your VR program are currently providing or offering remote or virtual learning opportunities for students. So I think today's presentation should really be applicable. It doesn't really look like there are that many places, only about 8% aren't providing anything. So Deanna, if we want to go ahead and look at the first poll and just see who is on today's call.
Yep, I'm relaunching it. So
Great.
Hopefully you can see it.
So if folks could just take a minute and let us know who is out there. If you're a teacher or an educator, or you're working in the VR system, or if you're state or local, as well as if any of our partner agencies are on, families, community rehab providers, or other. Who is out there?
About half of you have voted.
And remember, you can vote in the poll, and you don't have to vote in the chat. We can capture your answer a little more clearly.
And we will know everybody that's on the call too. Zoom does a nice job of letting us know your name and your emails.
So you can receive your certificate of attendance.
Yes.
About 2/3 have voted, and it's slowing down. So should I share?
Yeah, why don't we? So it looks like the majority of the folks on today's call are in the education field, either teachers or transition coordinators. And then a good number of folks that are on are also VR counselors. And then some folks at the state level, a couple family members, some community rehab providers, and some folks in higher ed. So great, that helps us as we proceed with the presentation. So thanks for completing those polls. So we next want to talk just briefly about the fact that even though we are living in this different world, things have definitely changed, that while we're working virtually, remotely, from our offices, from our schools, it is important that we maintain strong, effective partnerships with our agency partners, be they education and VR working together, or VR education and our other agency folks from IDDD, mental health, children, youth, family services, as well as continue to collaborate with our youth and our families. So in looking at that, thinking about some various ways to stay connected, I know a number of folks are doing virtual get-togethers, be they virtual brunches or happy hours, for the agency partners, our co-workers to get together and just to touch base. And I think to share information, what are your schedules like? If you are in a school, are you operating on a normal school schedule, or do you have alternate hours that you're having? Are there office hours? And I know it really does vary. not only from state to state, but within states, from school district to school district. Oftentimes they have set up different schedules. So I think it's important for our agency partners to connect to figure out exactly how they're working. And likewise with the VR system, some states, VR agency is still working in their brick and mortar buildings. So what is their schedules like, and how can that connection be made? I think it's also important, especially as we're starting to talk about in this presentation, work-based learning experiences, how are those being coordinated and delivered? Who is providing services? Are the community rehab providers still engaged in this process? And how are they interacting with students? Are the VR folks working, and how are they coordinating? Or are schools providing those opportunities for students? Also, I think it's important what is being shared with families and what types of things and activities are being done in the home. And we're going to talk in a minute about how that information is being documented. It's also important that, along with this, that as we're looking at learning experiences and work-based learning experiences, that the education system is still providing their requirements of the IEP and the requirements of their IDEA, and that we are not supplanting what the VR folks are doing, that we're working in collaboration. So it is important that that dialogue and that communication is occurring. I wanted to mention just briefly, there is a new guide, a new publication that has just come out. It was developed in collaboration with WINTAC, NTACT, and Transcend. And it is a guide for VR and educators in looking at working in collaboration for the development and the implementation of PREETs. So that guide is available. There's excellent information, tools, and strategies contained within. There is a link directly for that on the slide. And there will be a webinar in the coming weeks that will go into more depth about the guide. But we did want to mention it and wanted to highlight a couple aspects of the guide. One is the fact that our partnerships are important. We still need to stay engaged with our agency partners as well as our families, and consider ways to actively engage our students that we are working with. So if you haven't been in constant contact with your partners, please reach out and at least touch base in a virtual meeting. We also wanted to mention the importance of making sure that we're documenting what we are doing and working with our students. So depending on how that learning instruction is being delivered, how are we making sure that we are documenting the activities that are being provided to students? We are going to provide some examples of how documentation can occur and whether that documentation is being completed by the education professionals or the VR professionals or the provider agencies, that we are keeping track of what is occurring. While we need to be flexible, we still also need to be aware that we still need to meet the requirements of IDA and WIOA. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brenda and stop my video.
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. So I came across this opinion piece in Education Weekly yesterday that was published by Natalie Millman, and it was titled, "This is emergency remote teaching, not just online teaching." And I think that is a really good way to frame our discussion today regarding virtual work-based learning experiences. While we really believe that many of these online resources and practices for remote work-based learning can be used well after this crisis is over as a way to really successfully deliver pre-employment transition services to students, you all are being asked to work with a tremendous sense of urgency in designing and implementing a program for remote service delivery. And that brings a whole host of challenges in terms of trying to do that quickly. And so in addition to knowing what online curricula to use, before we start talking about all that, and Michael's got some great information to share, we do want to take a few minutes to discuss the ways that you can coordinate and deliver these services as quickly as possible. So first of all, let's make sure we're all on the same page. When we're talking about work-based learning experiences, or WBLE that you'll sometimes see it referred to as, we really like to kind of use the definition that the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth uses. So the way they define work-based learning is it's a supervised program that really links knowledge gained at the work site with a planned program of study. So it's not just having kids go out and take a look at jobs, or having kids get online and look at jobs. It's connected together so that you have a conversation about helping the students know what to look for when they're online looking at jobs, and then have a conversation about that afterwards. What did you see? What did you really like about that job? Those kinds of things. So that's a really key piece when you're looking at an entire work-based learning experience program, especially online. And what we hope you can do online as well is to look at all the different types of experiences. So it may be job shadowing, or internships, or informational interviews. All of those kinds of things we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. And one of the reasons that we wanted to bring this particular webinar to you is because we know that work-based learning experiences have absolutely been shown to be one of the strongest predictors of adult employment success. And so when students and our youth are provided work-based learning experiences early and often, and those also include opportunities for paid work in competitive integrated settings, we see tremendous success as an adult. When you look at work-based learning experiences in correlation with pre-employment transition services, WIOA, or the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, really defines work-based learning experiences as one of the 5 required pre-employment transition services that must be made available in collaboration with local education agencies to all students with disabilities who need them and who are eligible or potentially eligible for VR services. And the way they define that is it may include in-school or after-school opportunities, or experience outside of that traditional school setting, and it's provided in an integrated environment to the maximum extent possible. Well, we all know that's going to be a little challenging right now, but absolutely that's still the direction that we're going. So when you look at virtual work-based learning experiences, when we tried to kind of pull this out, those pieces of what I just described that you can really look at virtually involve career mentorship, which is an opportunity for those students to engage with a mentor who teaches or provides career-related guidance and advice. Informational interviews, and that's really just an informal conversation for a student with somebody that is working in a job that really interests that particular student. And they can give them information and advice about that job, and they can find a little bit more information out about the job openings around that job. Job shadowing is another one we can do online and virtually, and that's an opportunity for students to go in and observe different jobs and ask those businesses questions about what kind of skills do I need for this job? You know, what do I need to be prepared for? And they can actually see some of the tasks that are involved in performing that job. And then finally, workplace tours. So it's an opportunity for students to really take a look firsthand at the work site, and you learn a little bit more about the business. You can even have an opportunity online to meet different employees and ask questions, and Michael will talk about that a little bit more in a minute. What we tried to do on this particular slide is to talk a little bit about what I just mentioned, that work-based learning continuum. So if you look at this particular slide, in the middle there is a circle, and we divided that into 4 quadrants. And if you start on the upper left-hand side, you look at job shadowing and work site tours. Those can include those online videos that Michael's going to talk about, really touring businesses and specific jobs within that business. You can do this in a group chat room. Michael will talk about that a little bit more, or individually. And it always involves an opportunity for the students to reflect back on what they saw and what they learned. So it's kind of like structured and guiding learning around that. As you go across and you look at now the upper right-hand corner, you're looking at informational interviews and mentoring. And that really involves interactive hands-on demonstrations, career cluster employer programs. This can be done individually or by group as well. And the mentoring piece really looks at matching students with adult mentors. So that is something we really wanted to focus on as well. Going down, you look at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, and we're talking about something that was really a new concept for me as we were looking at online options for work-based learning, something called pre-boarding and onboarding. It's probably not new for you all that are in the business world, but it was sure new for Michael and I as we looked at this. Those pre-boarding and onboarding videos are videos that employers have out there for potential and new hires. And it does something a little different than showing you just the job tasks involved. It really shows you the business culture. What is the culture like in that business? We talk to students about work environment. Well, that's what this does. It talks about that work environment. So it's a really cool way to begin to look at researching and seeing those jobs as well. And then as we move to that last piece of the circle, or that last quadrant, which is probably the most important, internships and apprenticeships, which is on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. That particular, the way we have it depicted on this slide, it's in blue. And that's because this is going to be really difficult to do online. But boy, we're hoping that all of the other pieces, the job shadowing, the work site tours, the informational interviews, looking at those pre-boarding and onboarding videos, having an opportunity for students to do all of that will prepare them for what we feel absolutely is the most important aspect of work-based learning, and that's paid work-based learning opportunities in competitive integrated employment settings where you can really get industry recognized credentials and have great experience with that. So that is still our goal. That's still what we want to shoot for, and hopefully maybe this summer or definitely in the fall, the students will be able to move forward with that as well. One of the other key aspects is looking at your student outcomes. So as you're designing this virtual work-based learning program, you want to make sure that the student's able to gain insight into these work experience opportunities. So whatever you're putting together, how are the students going to gain more insight into those work experiences? Are they going to be able to receive information regarding employer and industry expectations? Have you designed it so they're really going to get that information? Are they going to be able to learn the job skills related to the expectations that are set for different job positions that are out there? Can you design it so they can get guidance from people that are actually practicing and working in that particular industry? And it's also going to give them opportunity to develop networking relationships so that, especially if you're looking at opportunities locally or regionally, maybe these are employers you can follow up again with once we're able to get back out there into the community. And maybe students, if they were really excited about this particular job, they can then actually really visit that work site, maybe even have an opportunity for a paid work-based learning experience in that site later on this year. The other piece that we wanted to share with you all are, we identified, I think it's about 8 components. When you're developing a virtual work-based learning experience, these are some things you want to think about as you're developing this program. You want to identify a process for connecting with students for the provision of virtual work-based learning programs. What's your process? What you're going to do? And then develop a plan for how students are going to access work-based learning virtually and how those services are going to be provided to students that may not have remote access. We're going to talk about that in a minute. You also need to identify a platform for the provision of these services. So what platform are you going to use? Are you going to use Zoom? Are you going to use WebEx? How are you going to deliver these services? And you really want to always remember, and Michael talked about this at the beginning, make sure you maintain communication between vocational rehabilitation, providers, and schools to make sure that those virtual work-based learning activities are coordinated and are provided without supplanting or duplicating what IDEA transition services are already providing. So those schools that are still providing distance learning services, what are you doing around transition services? And you want to make sure that you are supplementing what they're doing, not supplanting anything that they're already doing. How are you going to know that? You got to talk to them. So that communication piece is really important. Then being able to identify what work-based learning curricula you're going to use and what resources are going to be shared with the students. Make sure you go in and take a look at that. And I think we've got some really exciting ideas for curricula you can use absolutely this afternoon or tomorrow, hopefully. Another piece that is really important is to be able to determine how students are going to participate or progress, what those outcomes are going to be in remote work-based learning activities, and whether or not you're going to do this individually or in a group setting, and how you're going to track, report, and measure those services. Remember when I was telling you earlier about the fact that it's not just giving them an online resource to look at. Here's somebody, working in a bakery. It's about what you do around that, the conversations you have around that, and how you're going to measure how the student is learning as they're exposed to that. You also want to identify ways that you're going to enhance the student and family engagement in remote work-based learning. That's key. Guys, if they're not engaged, if you can't get them hooked into this, it doesn't matter how good your curriculum is. It doesn't matter how great your platform is. If they don't care and they don't want to get connected, you're not going to be able to move forward. And then finally, and probably most importantly, it is very important to look at working with your VR business specialists and your career one-stop partners to develop a plan for your employer engagement. So that is huge. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. I want to give a shout out to a great colleague and friend of ours, Bridget Griffin from Nebraska Vocational Rehabilitation. She shared with us PREET's guidance that she has sent to her staff, and that link is at the bottom of this particular slide, Nebraska General Virtual PREET's guidance. These were tips that she shared with her staff for coordinating virtual pre-employment transition services. And so I'm not going to go over all of these, but they were really great tips, and your agency may have done that already as well. But it's very important that you all in leadership in your VR agencies are sharing with your staff how they can use their phone, how they can maybe FaceTime, email, or text, or just regular mail, reach out to students and talk about these services, and especially when you look at work-based learning experiences. How do they want to access these services? What are you going to do? And you need to communicate. One of the really great tips that Bridget had on here is to make sure that you talk with your school contacts and let them know that you are maintaining contact with the students. So as Michael mentioned earlier, there are some school buildings that are closed, maybe even some schools that are closed the rest of the year. In some situations, they're not even providing distance learning. So if that is the case, we want you all to know VR absolutely is still open for business. Vocational rehabilitation is still providing services to these students. And we want to be able to share with you what we're doing, and we've got to continue to maintain contacts with those students. So that communication is really key. And especially for students with the more complex support needs, we definitely want to reach out to the teachers to see how they're engaging with those students and ask how VR can support or maybe supplement any activities that schools are already doing virtually and remotely. And then especially look at prioritizing your soon-to-be graduating students and those for whom you've maybe already been planning to set up summer work-based learning experiences. Some of you all still probably have those set up and you're in the process of trying to decide, are we still going to be able to do those? If yes, how? If not, what do we do? You know, what can we do in place of that? So those are all really good conversations to have. And I think those are really good tips that Bridget had here. The next piece that we wanted to talk about is, okay, basically, just because, as I mentioned earlier, those school buildings are closed, it doesn't mean that VR and providers cannot continue to provide pre-employment transition services to your students. So if the schools are open in some capacity, we're really encouraging teachers to reach out to your VR points of contact to help them find out ways to connect with students. VR is really struggling in some states trying to get to these students. They've got these amazing services that they can still provide. They just don't know how to get to the kids. So if you can help VR in your local community access those students, it would be greatly appreciated. Teachers, you guys are really that trusted source with the families. And so soliciting your help is really important. How do we get paperwork to these students? How do we communicate with the parents and the families so that they can understand what all we're doing? And it's also really important, teachers, if you can communicate with the VR and the providers, as Michael mentioned, if there are scheduled days or scheduled times that maybe you are providing distance learning to these students, and you can say, hey, we're in with these students at this time. We're having some classroom time here. You might can piggyback on that time, or it's important for you to know if the school's working with the student from 11 to noon, then that's not something that the VR provider would be able to offer work-based learning experiences during that same time. You'll want to coordinate that. And then you also want to make sure that you're communicating between VR and the school districts and our provider agencies regarding how students are submitting assignments online. And if those could maybe be methods that VR and providers could use simply to share homework assignments or activities that VR and providers may assign during the provision of work-based learning experiences. When you look at students without remote access, wow, this is a toughie, right? So you're going to have to really think about, again, who's going to be responsible for providing virtual work-based learning experiences to students who do not have remote access. Equity is important, right? So if you can provide it to students that do have access, what are you going to do for those kids that don't? Work with your schools to determine how students without remote access are actually participating in their distance learning experiences. If a student doesn't have internet, that has maybe a laptop, a school-issued laptop, one of the things that some states are doing is you could put work-based learning experience activities or modules on a jump drive or a flash drive, and those could either be mailed directly to the student or distributed to students using the same delivery that the school is using for these kids. So kind of communicate and talk about that. You can also really adapt the curriculum and the activity assignments to paper and pencil, good old-fashioned paper and pencil, if that's an opportunity and that's something that you can do. And then give them their written assignments, mail them, and then use the phone to follow up. And the other thing that we wanted to mention, a few states are looking at options for using lending libraries or assistive technology centers to loan equipment such as iPads or a laptop, and maybe even hotspots. So conversations to have, definitely. In addition, when you think about the plan for how the student is going to access work-based learning experiences, you need to look at all the possibilities of distance learning service provision and the resources provided on both the transitionta.org and wintac.org websites. Tons of curriculum and activities. They are coming in daily and sometimes hourly. So we've got a great bunch of activities that you all can use. So take a look at that. That's really important. What curriculum are you going to use? For those with internet access, providers can use platforms like Zoom or Slack or Signal or Google Meet to hold training with students remotely. And there are also, you can use video remote interpreting options for deaf students. You also may want to consider the use of social media such as YouTube or Facebook Live, and you could provide like group trainings by creating a private group or a private chat room. Students can access those then via their phone or computer. And for YouTube, you might be able to deliver content via a video and then link to a survey that the student completes after viewing that information to be able to document attendance. So once you figure out the platform, you've got to think about the student's current IT options and their internet capabilities. So really discuss that student's ability to participate in virtual work-based learning activities and their level of support needs. Is that student pretty savvy in navigating, the computer, or are they going to need more guided instruction and one-on-one support, maybe from a family member? Discuss these options with the parents, with the family. And you're going to need to coordinate a meeting, coordinate that meeting online or maybe by phone, and identify times when that student is going to be available to actually participate in virtual work-based learning experiences. Develop a weekly schedule and email that to the student and the parent. Let them know, hey, we talked about this. These are the times when we want to connect. Remind them about that. And then make sure that you ensure that that student and that parent has your contact information, VR. If it's a VR counselor or a provider or other staff, how do they communicate back with you if they're not going to be available during a time you set up? We use the term over-communicate. You can definitely over-communicate in this day and age. Remind them, hey, we're talking in an hour, all those things are going to be really important. So 2 resources that we really wanted to take a minute to highlight, and Michael, you can go to, so 2 resources that we wanted to take a minute to highlight for students who are blind or vision impaired are blindnessabilities.com and the National Homework Hotline. These are like, for the blindness abilities, it's a free blind abilities app. And it's one of the quickest ways to reach high school students. All of the podcasts and the blogs are created by fellow blind and visually impaired individuals. And there are categories of podcasts that address like college careers and STEM careers, job insights, there's tech abilities, technology, independent living, and a lot more. And those podcasts could be used as part of an activity for work-based learning experiences, and really any of the 5 required pre-employment transition service activities. One of my colleagues, Carol Pankow, she stated that when she was using this, in the very first 18 months that they rolled this out, they had 250,000 downloads. So I think this is something, a platform that people are really using, and so we encourage you to take a look at this. And many of the podcasts can also be transcribed so deaf students can benefit as well. The other one on here was the National Homework Hotline. This was just put together, resources put together by teachers of blind and vision impaired students in grades K through 12 that are experiencing emergency school closures due to COVID-19. So it's a great opportunity. The teachers can help navigate accessible websites with JAWS and really provide some good technical assistance through that National Homework Hotline. And then for students who are blind or visually impaired, deaf or hard of hearing, or deaf-blind, we also wanted to share information on Live Binder. This is a project out of the Texas Sensory Support Network with funding from Texas Education Agency. And this project put together a ton of information on virtual activities that can be used during this COVID-19 crisis for teachers and families. And it includes live stream and virtual field trip videos of like national parks and NASA and museums. There's even one sharing where a museum asks people to go back and recreate paintings with stuff that you find at home. So there's unbelievable ideas for how to get the kids really engaged and interact in some of these virtual work-based learning activities. Well, I wanted to mention that while we understand that some of the resources we share may not be accessible for everybody, in these challenging times when folks are really scrambling to get as much information as quickly as possible, we have opted to share the resources as we find them. We look to our state VR agencies and our schools and our other partners to keep us informed regarding these resources that have really been good, that have good accessibility. And we encourage you to contact some of the site developers directly if you have questions on accessibility, because when we come out of this, you guys, on the other end of this crisis, these are all going to be really good resources for students to be able to continue to use, but we want to know what works and what's best, and they haven't been completely vetted. We're just going to be honest with you. Some of these are going to work really well. Some of these maybe not as well from an accessibility standpoint. So let us know, and we'll continue to share that. Okay, so we wanted to share just a couple of additional creative ideas from states for students. And one of those is Mississippi is thinking about distributing written packets of work-based learning activities with meal pickups through their schools. Many schools are offering bag lunches, I think you all know about, for pickup in communities where schools really depend on school for breakfast and lunch. So VR might be able to coordinate with schools and deliver those work-based learning activities via those written packets, send some flash drives to the students when they pick up their meals. And then the students in District of Columbia public schools without internet access have options to learn to access lessons through broadcast television, like Maine Network TV is broadcasted on air and it's part of their local cable package. So think about whether or not you might be able to access that kind of a system as well. You need to look at your online platform considerations. Be mindful when you're looking at this distance learning platforms. Data privacy, we've all heard about the Zoom bombing, lots of other concerns. So we've got some really good links in here for you to take a look at, tips on, for example, how to prevent Zoom bombing and just other information. The other thing that is so important is you're going to want to solicit your family support. So specific directions for families on how to access these platforms. Make sure you get the appropriate permission and signatures. We have lots of information on our WINTAC website about electronic signatures and how state VR agencies are accessing those. So please take a look at those if you have any questions. Last couple of things I wanted to mention is that none of this works if the student and the family is not engaged or it's too confusing for them. So a couple of things to keep in mind: if the student is over 18, you do need to get their permission to talk with the student, with the parent and the family. Make it fun. Try to simplify this process as much as possible. Listen to what that family needs, what is important for them, and then try to tap into that. Respect where the families are. Some of them have unrealistic expectations, but talk with them and see if you can use what their concerns are as a starting point for sharing ideas virtually for opportunities for work experience. Again, you can over communicate, use email, phone. At this time when everybody's getting all kinds of things online, it's important, and messages can get really lost easily. So send out reminders, maintain contact with the students and the parents. parents and maintain a consistent schedule, have virtual meetings with those parents, and start those meetings on a real positive note if you can, and always be mindful not to post any recordings or share any live stream pictures of the students or the families on the internet. One resource we wanted to share with you is a reality check. That's a beautiful way for parents to get engaged and involved, a way to kind of start building that foundation for parent engagement. So check out reality check. It's a really cool resource. Finally, I wanted to talk for a minute about employer engagement, because guys, if we don't have the employers engaged through this, just like if we don't get the students and the parents engaged, nothing's going to happen. One example that we wanted to share is what Ohio is doing. And as a result and in response to COVID-19, they have worked with their business relations specialists, and they have reached out to more than 500 employer partners to identify these staffing needs. And that has allowed the VR agency to quickly develop an urgent jobs list that really centralized openings with essential businesses, that's a new word now, right? And that list really indexes employers by category and then by job type. So job examples will range from outpatient transporters at hospitals to forklift operators at warehouses, etc. So really take a look at that. It's a great example that states are doing. And then on a national level, Kathy West Evans, who is the Director of Business Relations with our National Employment Team, or the NET, through the Council of State Administrators of Vocational Rehabilitation, or CSAVR. She is currently sharing hot jobs and recruitment notices from our corporate partners. The NET members all across the nation are sharing their state and local area opportunities. And business partners are now really reaching out to look at how they can increase their work with the NET to access even a stronger talent pool. And they volunteered to do some webinars to introduce companies and careers within their organizations. So there's some really great things that they're doing as well. And before I turn it back over to Michael, and I just wanted to say on behalf of WINTAC and NTACT, Michael and I wanted to take a moment to thank you for all that you guys are doing to try and to continue to serve students with disabilities during this crisis. None of these online resources matter if you can't get them in the hands of the students and develop a meaningful plan for how you're going to use them. None of that happens without you. You guys are the ones on the front line trying to make this happen. So in addition to our amazing healthcare workers and our first responders, please know how much each of you are valued and appreciated in what you're doing. So now, Michael, you have like, I don't know, 10 minutes.
Okay, Brenda.
Share those resources. So, okay.
All right. So in this next section, we want to share resources that we found that actually were shared from folks, a number of these on our last couple webinars that NTACT has done, that WINTAC has done. I also noticed that a lot of folks were adding things into the Q&A in the chat section of resources. So we will be gathering those and sharing those. So with that, I'm going to jump into this next section where we are talking about some examples of resources to assist you all in working virtually with students on work-based learning experiences. The first thing we wanted to mention actually comes from the state of Washington, and Tammy Doyle from the state of Washington shared this on a webinar we had last week, and it's the T-Folio. T-Folio is a free transition portfolio tool for high school youth with disabilities. It's designed as a guide for students, and it's set up into 5 different units, with one of the units being work-based learning experiences. It's really a nice tool that students can use and keep track of these learning experiences, these learning opportunities that they are currently engaged with. Also wanted to talk just a little bit about this idea of doing remote job shadowing and work site tours. Brenda mentioned this, but it is something that can still take place in a virtual environment. And in a minute, I'm going to share several sites. And I also noticed that some of today's participants were sharing sites on different types of virtual tours, video tours that could take place. We also wanted to just express that with a number of people working from home, working remotely, that it does present an opportunity for social networking, really tapping into the contacts that you have, that your families have, in looking at ways to connect to different folks in different job areas that they can talk to and experience virtually the various career options that are out there. Wanted to mention some ideas around looking at structuring some job shadowing experiences for students, and looking at not just sending the video links, but really structuring those job shadowing experiences. One of them could be, doing this as a group job shadowing experience, looking at this idea of a scavenger hunt with questions that a group of students could explore and keep track of and share on Google Docs or other platforms where they're looking at videos and they're actually looking for specific things in a scavenger hunt fashion. We're also, and we'll share some of the examples of these in the next couple of slides, but looking at providing job shadowing reflection sheets for students or online documents that they can record what they have learned from the job shadowing experience. So what they learned about the job, what they liked and what they didn't like about what they viewed in the videos, what other ideas for careers that they might have now that they viewed various jobs in a certain career pathway. One of the resources that we wanted to share comes from Nebraska, and this particular site, and it's on this slide and the next slide, take you on online career tours. And there is a online document that you can download that has specific activities that are related to the different career areas. So there are questions to consider before looking at the videos, during, and then follow-up for each of the career areas. And there also is included, along with these, virtual industry tours. So they match up. So not only is it the video to take the tour, but when you go to this site, they also have follow-up activities that you can review and students can do. I guess in my mind, it would be something great to upload if you are doing distance learning and you have a Google Doc space or some other virtual platform that you're using, to assign these to students or groups of students to review and then submit. Looking at virtual worksite tours, really looking at touring businesses, looking at those sites that offer different types of essential jobs that are currently happening that students could experience when they go out into their communities that are still open, such as grocery stores, but also then looking at the virtual opportunities to tour job sites. Looking at the organization of these experiences around career clusters, using the interactive activities. And one of the suggestions that we had was looking at putting together an online game such as What's My Line, where you could have students look at different types of job careers and guess what those professions may be in a matching type of activity. Looking at informational interviews, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, with a number of folks working in different types of situations and working remotely, looking at ways to set those up and then guiding those interviews and those discussions. Also looking at ways to teach problem-solving skills through work-based learning experiences. So setting up an assignment or a project like the example that we have on the screen on this slide, where you're having the student solve a problem that a worker may have in a particular job. So in this case, looking at a student setting up a design for a building, looking at zoning requirements, applications, and so forth that they may need. But you could look at that as a problem-solving activity that either an individual student or a group of students could engage with. Looking at career-focused mentoring ideas and matching students with employees in different types of jobs that they are interested in. Looking at those online mentorships with vetted adults is another suggestion. And then Brenda had mentioned employer pre-boarding and onboarding. And there's a company called Sapling that provides examples for businesses on pre-boarding and onboarding videos and how to create those, and are actually offering this service free through June when you go to those sites. We wanted to mention some onboarding videos that do exist. So the example on this slide is from the company Zynga, the online gaming company. And when you go to that link, it is a YouTube video that they utilize to as an onboarding video for their new employees. We mentioned explorework.org that in collaboration with WINTAC was developed, that looks at the 5 pre-employment transition service areas. And one of those is work-based learning experiences. So when you go to Explore Work, there are specific activities that are directly related to work-based learning experiences. Also wanted to mention and highlight the Career One-Stop videos for work exploration, as well as also connected to the Career One-Stop's My Skills, My Future websites. Another resource that explores different types of job opportunities is called Road Trip Nation. You can find that on YouTube. And again, it offers a number of videos on different types of career options. It allows students to experience various work experiences from the actual employee, talking about how they got into those jobs, what they liked about those jobs, and how they could access a career in those various fields. Another resource of career path exploration is found through the public broadcasting station KQED, and they have 50 videos on career path exploration, along with guides, work activity guides for students to go through that align to those 50 career path videos. The Khan Academy is another area that offers career exploration videos. And the one that's highlighted here is a woman that is a healthcare community liaison. And she is an individual that has a disability. And she talks about how she was able to obtain that job, what training it needed, and offers suggestions for students interested in that career field. But there are numerous others on Khan Academy for career exploration. So I wanted to mention, as you're looking at the data collection and looking at how to make sure that we're taking into account how to measure these experiences, this site takes you to modules and provides documentation on how to select appropriate measures, how to do portfolios, how to design a rubric for activities, as well as looking at student self-assessments. So a couple of additional supports. This slide are an overview of resources around COVID-19. And those are from both OSERS and the Department of Education, as well as RSA, and those links are provided. And we would like you, as we're wrapping up today, to know that on the Transition Coalition website is an online discussion forum. So if you would like to go on there to share additional resources, or if you have questions from today regarding work-based learning experiences, please use that site as a discussion board. So again, that's on the Transition Coalition website. This link on the slide will take you directly there. It's under the Ask the Expert section. As a reminder, and folks had asked about this, but the PowerPoint can be found on our transition website at NTACT, transitionta.org. And today's recording, as well as the captioned recording, will be available. Also, in a day, you'll be receiving an email with the evaluation link that directly connects to receiving CRC credits if you go to the link within that evaluation. And then all participants will receive a certificate of attendance for today. Just as a reminder, both NTACT and WINTAC have on their website specific pages for COVID-19 that continually are updated with additional resources and reference documents. So please check those out and continue to check those out because they continue to be updated. Wanted to remind folks that there are additional webinars coming up. Tomorrow, WINTAC is doing a webinar for providers and VR and education and agency staff on how to really maintain and function in these difficult times to support students and adults in the VR system. So that webinar is scheduled for tomorrow. And it is at 2 o'clock and the link is there. You can also go to the WINTAC website. We also will be hosting 2 additional webinars through NTAC next Tuesday, the 14th, on strategies and resources for students with complex support needs. And then the following Tuesday on April 24th, looking at using social media for peer-to-peer engagement. As we've been mentioning, we would appreciate your feedback for today's webinar. You will be emailed a link tomorrow. The survey and the link is on the screen too today, and I believe it was provided also in the chat box, but please let us know your thoughts and any suggestions for future webinars. Also, we encourage you, if you are not connected to NTAC and receiving our weekly email blast, please sign up at the NTAC website. And with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. And Brenda, if you want to back on, just want to thank you all for your participation and for sharing those resources.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody.
Okay, thank you.